How we doing, guys? Richard Hicks Jr. Sports Podcast, and I wanted to speak on some of these new hires in the NFL. We've got quite a few, a lot of moving parts, and I wanted to kind of break down some of this for all of you. Usually, the traffic picks up this time of the year, whether it be assistance from teams that are still in the playoffs, in this case, the Super Bowl, or coaches who recently their seasons ended. You get a lot of traffic this time of the year in terms of new coaching hires. I'm going to start with Kevin O'Connell, who will be taking the Minnesota Vikings coaching job immediately after the Super Bowl. O'Connell currently serves as the offensive coordinator underneath Sean McVay for the Rams, and he's had a lot of success with quarterback Matthew Stafford. I find it interesting because prior to Stafford's stay this year in Los Angeles, he had a lot of issues winning. Now, granted, nobody wins with the Lions, but the new quarterback that O'Connell will be working with, Kirk Cousins, has always kind of been, I guess you could say, in that Stafford kind of category. A guy who puts up great numbers, but has been inconsistent and hasn't really been able to get over the hump. But when you look at the weapons that Minnesota has, they have a top 5 running back in Dalvin Cook, an excellent receiving duo of Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. I would venture to say that Minnesota does have a lot of talent. I don't think anyone who follows the team or the NFL would ever question that. But, it's a big jump from when you're underneath an already established coach as opposed to branching out on your own. It's not going to be easy. But the Vikings, honestly, the past few years have kind of been right in the realm of mediocrity, just in the playoff mix, but not getting there frequently. I myself like the hire. I think when you have a guy who has a good reputation of building up quarterbacks, and if there's still a belief that a guy like a Kirk Cousins should be a starter in the league, I think it's a good pair. And at minimum, you find out if that's the right direction to go in. And I think the Minnesota Vikings should know that sooner than rather later. This coaching hire I really enjoyed. I think this is a great hire. Dennis Allen to the New Orleans Saints. For those of you who don't know who Dennis Allen is, when Sean Payton was out with COVID on a late season Monday Night Football game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dennis Allen took over the head coaching duties for that particular game. And they did something that almost never happens, and that's shout out the great Tom Brady. The Saints have had issues at the quarterback position with Taysom Hill still kind of in flux. They're not sure if they want to commit to him as the true number one quarterback. And Jameis Winston, who was having a pretty good year, they have a decision to make if they want to try to bring him back. His season ended prematurely on a knee injury, and he actually had been playing rather well. For years, their quarterback situation was sewed up with Drew Brees, but now they are looking year to year to figure out who's the future, if Hill's the guy, if they want to make him a gadget player or not. What I like about this hire is that it's in-house. It's an in-house promotion. And he's already proven that his defense is really good. The Saints were a very competitive team this year, but they ran out of juice and they had a ton of injuries. But with him being the head coach, I don't necessarily feel that the defensive side of the football is going to lose much. I would say with the Saints offensively, they're going to have to figure out what they want to do. And as I had made mention of on my Instagram page, Alvin Kamara was recently arrested. We'll find out what the ramifications are with that. But the New Orleans Saints are feeling comfortable going in-house. And I think having a coach for as long as they did in Sean Payton and having his blessing on Allen taking his job, I think it speaks, a lot of weight on what they feel about him. This is an interesting one. Not finalized just yet. But former Giants coach Joe Judge, I'm rather familiar with him, potentially going to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the thing with Judge, he did something that almost never happens. He was promoted from special teams coordinator at that time with the New England Patriots, making a full jump to a head coach with the New York Football Giants. Only 3 times in league history have coaches made that jump from a special teams coach into a head coaching situation. And sadly, Judge is the only one who didn't succeed. The other 3 are John Harbaugh, Marv Levy, and Mike Ditka. And there are a lot of Super Bowls there. Levy took the Bills to 4 consecutive in the 90s. Ditka was the head coach of the 85 Bears. Harbaugh, a few years back, actually closer to a decade now, defeated his brother in the Super Bowl. So definitely you can say that those worked. And I think it started a trend, or at least a thought, that special teams guys could essentially make the jump into the head coaching realm. But Joe Judge was another disaster. And while I don't necessarily believe that the head coach is all to blame, it takes a lot to fail, I do think that he was in over his head. The attractive thing for Judge, if he does go to the Raiders, is that he has a working relationship with recently signed defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, who was with the Giants during Joe Judge's run. And when you go upstairs, you also have front office member Dave Ziegler, who is familiar with Judge in New England, as well as recently hired head coach Josh McDaniels. So the Raiders are definitely bringing in the New England vibe with a lot of New England coaches. And, you know, when you fail as a young coach, I don't necessarily think it's a death sentence in terms of where your career can go. But Judge is going to have to start again from the ground up. I'll be lying if I say I wasn't sold on him when he first interviewed for the Giants job. But, you know, there's a lot more than just talking to the media. You have to win games. And Judge definitely lost the faith of not only the fan base, but the organization. And again, I don't necessarily think it was all on him. I think he inherited a very rough situation, but he did not survive the second year. This guy, Lovey Smith, excellent head coach in his time with the Chicago Bears. He is the last head coach to take them to a Super Bowl appearance, losing to the great Peyton Manning and the great Tony Dungy. Houston was surprisingly competitive this year. A lot of people did not have the Houston Texans being competitive at all, especially in the wake of Deshaun Watson's legal issues. But Lovey has done a very good job serving as the assistant head coach. And similar to Dennis Allen, this would be an in-house hire. To my understanding, Brian Flores is also a candidate here in Houston. And I've said on previous shows that I do believe that Flores would be a good fit as well because of his relationship with the general manager, Nick Caserio. Once again, this is a New England connection. And quarterback Deshaun Watson, you know, publicly stating that he wanted to play for Brian Flores. And that's kind of what sparked a lot of rumors that Watson may have been traded to Miami. That was a hot rumor when this season started and during different courses of the year. You know, with Watson's legal trouble, it kind of got pushed to the side, but there was definitely a mutual interest between coach and player. And speaking of Brian Flores, I wanted to hit on not only his future, but what this lawsuit means. There's a lot to still be revealed when it comes to this entire case. As many of you know, Brian Flores, I'm sorry about that, accidentally hit a button here. Brian Flores is suing 3 football teams in addition to the NFL in what he deems to be improper hiring processes with the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule is intended to give minority coaches equal footing in terms of getting interviews to get jobs as head coaches. Me personally, I have mixed feelings on all of this. While I do believe that the NFL has to do a much better job in terms of having a more diverse coaching rotation around the entire league, I do question Brian Flores' motives. Because, truth be told, at least in my opinion, I believe if his friend Bill Belichick didn't accidentally text him when it was intended for another Brian Dable, who ended up being the Giants coach, I'm not 100% sure if this course of action is taken. Flores has accused the New York Giants of already more or less hiring Dable before his interview, when the Giants ultimately did announce Dable's hiring after the Flores interview. And while I'm not saying that it wouldn't be hurtful or at minimum frustrating to hear from a colleague that the interview you're going into is not real, or that you're not going to get it, so to speak, that wasn't the language used in the text. Essentially, Belichick thought he was talking Brian Dable. But the point I'm making is, according to the lawsuit, naming Denver and naming his former employer, Miami, a lot of these incidents were happening long before this Giants interview. And while I'm not trying to discredit Flores, because like I said, I want to see the facts and I want to see how this all plays out, I do find it a little questionable that he would report something like that years later. Because when I consider that part of his motivation, or what he says his motivation is to help other coaches getting gigs in the future and changing some of the statutes of the Rooney Rule, I also feel that it could be deemed as a little hypocritical because of the fact that when this man was holding down the job for 3 solid seasons, this wasn't necessarily something that he was fighting for at the time. Having said that, there's one black coach in the NFL right now. And I also understand that there's a lot of things that need to be fixed in terms of having more diversity in a league, because it goes a little deeper than just having, coaches. It's when you look about how many people follow the NFL, I completely relate to the fact that you want to be able to, as a fan, see somebody that you can identify with. And if I was a black fan, I myself would be disappointed. I don't necessarily think that all the hiring measures are based on racism, but I would also be a hypocrite to assume that racism still doesn't exist in this country. So I think it's a very important lawsuit. I don't necessarily think that he wins, so to speak, when it comes to the New York Giants practices, because of the fact that I think the Giants essentially covered their bases. He accused John Elway and company of being drunk and being kind of disheveled when they did their interview a few years back. That I actually believe, but the problem is it's hard to prove. Where I do think Flores has a legitimate case is with his former employers in Miami, because he flat out said that he was offered money to tank games. Actually $100K per loss, according to Flores. And, there was some other backing that could make that side of this rather believable when you look at a former head coach like a Hugh Jackson, who was with the Cleveland Browns. But where I have, once again, I'm conflicted in the way I look at this is Hugh Jackson was with the the Browns when they went winless. And I would stand to question, okay, well, were you taking money when they tanked? He said that basically they were told by the organization, you're just going to tank. And ultimately after that, all those coaches were fired. So there's a lot of layers to this. And ultimately, as a fan of the NFL and just as a fan of fairness, I do hope that whatever comes of this lawsuit makes the playing field more fair. Because while I don't always believe that racism is the driving force in who you're going to hire, in the Giants case, I feel it had more to do with connections. And I have stated on previous shows, and even this one here, that I think Brian Flores, even before all the stuff with the New York Football Giants and the other teams mentioned, was a great fit for Houston. But ultimately, what anyone hopes for here is that there's honesty, because when you're approaching a big entity like the NFL, you would hope that it's a fact-based drive versus an emotional reaction. Having said that, I genuinely do understand both sides of it. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Me personally, I don't think Brian Flores is going to be coaching a team this year, because whether it's fair or not, with all the legality stuff going on, I would imagine that a lot of teams would see this as a potential red flag. Because at the end of the day, you cannot hire somebody off of any other reason than the fact that you think they're the most qualified. Having said that, there needs to be more diversity in the NFL. And I do think the Rooney Rule has actually hurt a lot of African-American coaches, because I do believe that it empowers the owners to kind of check the box off and just see it as something that they have to do for the league. I do believe in certain cases, it's something that they have to do. I mean, even when you have reviews at work, I don't necessarily think that bosses are always reviewing it to the best of their ability. They have to do a lot of them. And you do check. But a lot has to improve with this, and we'll see where this goes. I appreciate you watching, guys. Football season's coming to an end very soon with the Rams and the Bengals in the bowl, but there's a lot of head coaching stuff going on around the league, and I'm very curious to see where all of this takes us. Have a great day, guys, and a great rest of your week.